Welcome, everybody. We'll give you a second to roll in here.
If you don't want to roll, you can walk in, you can sit down,
You
whatever
can
you want.
sprint if you're super pumped.
Yeah. Maybe you're at the gym on a treadmill. I wouldn't recommend that, but
Yeah, yeah, multitasking, huh? That's what I should be doing. I should be going on to the treadmill after this. I don't know if I'll make it though, JV.
I'm kind of surprised Matt Carpenter hasn't done a webinar from the gym as he's pumping iron. We
Yeah,
shouldn't give him that idea.
yeah, we shouldn't. All right. Well, I'm sure we'll still have a few people rolling in, so welcome. Before we kick in here, just take a minute, put in the chat. We love to see. We usually have people from all over the place, so let us know. I think we're mostly going to have you guys are either a student that has started your senior year or about to, or your parents of a rising senior, but just put that in the chat where you are and the class of your child graduating from high school class. There we go. New Jersey. Nice. Don't be shy, everybody. There we go. Yeah, we got 26s. All right. As usual, we got people from all over the place. Bunch of East Coast, actually. So, all right. Well,
I'm seeing a
welcome.
couple upper North
Get into
Midwest.
California.
Yeah.
Your current stomping ground about to change. So,
Yeah, for about 10 more days.
yeah, I have to say, JP is joining me in the middle of moving. So we have to give him, or if we were local, I'd say we need to give him a round of applause for being here. I just did a move, so I get it. It's crazy. You can forget about your
I was
move.
going to say, you did yours not that long ago.
Nope, I remember. I feel your pain. So, um, okay. Well, again, welcome. Um, you guys all have, you might have younger kids too, but you got a senior, so it literally is game time, right? We're going to talk about the admissions part of this and the financial part of it, but it's here. Your child might have already started classes or is about to, maybe after Labor Day. So you got to get your head in this. Maybe you're already in the process and this is going to help you keep going wherever you are. That's great. If you haven't started, I know JP is going to talk about this on the admission side. Got to get going. So that's why we're here. We're showing up to guide you on this. So as just quick introductions, we probably have a bunch of people on here that have been on our webinars. You might know us already. I'm Peg Keough, Director of Education here at College Aid Pro. Been doing this work for quite a long time. I think my best credential is I have twins. I have a boy and a girl, and they are done. Wrote that check a while ago, happy to say. But it doesn't have to be as stressful as it is for a lot of families. I'm here to tell you it wasn't as bad for me because I did some of this stuff and I followed along and I kind of owned it. Um, if you have an echo, you might want to leave and come back. Maybe that'll help. I saw somebody put that in the chat.
Yeah,
I'm
say
gonna
I don't
let
hear
you,
an echo.
yeah, I don't either. I'm gonna let JP say hi in a minute. Couple housekeeping things before we get going. I just asked you to put that info in the chat, and we might ask you to put something else later. If you have questions, which is great, we love questions. Please put them in the Q&A. You can be anonymous, and we are sending out a recording tomorrow with our follow-up. So if you missed something, you want to share with anybody in your family, whatever, listen to it again, you're all good to go. So you want to say hi real quick, JP?
Yeah, I'm just going to point out you neglected to tell everyone your nickname, and I feel like I am obliged to say that you are the fairy godmother of financial aid. So can't let that go. I'm JP, and my nickname though is the Santa Claus of college planning. And I used to say it's just because of the beard. If you think of the Santa on Miracle on 34th Street, but it's also because I'm getting fatter. So I'm looking more like Santa every year. No, but no, my credentials, if you will, is I was a director of financial aid at USC, California, and that was a lifetime ago, probably like 25 years ago I was there. And I worked alongside admissions, traveled all over the country with admissions, worked in the dean's office, provost office. I was adjunct faculty when I left. So I kind of know the whole how higher education works from A to Z, front office, back office, all the dark secrets included. So yeah, that's kind of my background experience, if you will.
Yeah, yeah, and it's awesome to have JP on the team because I like people that have been behind the curtain, as I like to say. So, okay, so you are in great hands tonight. So let me share my screen and let's get rolling here. Okay. Um, if this is your first time being on a webinar, obviously we are College Aid Pro. The key thing here, we're very mission driven, empowering families to shop smarter for college. I challenge you to think you are shopping for a college, right? You are shopping for a product that you are going to purchase. Hopefully your purchase price will be as low as possible and you'll have a great fit. That's what we're talking about tonight. But our whole deal is if you don't understand the arena that you're in, you're going to spend way too much and you're going to have way more stress than you need to. So that's really why we're around. That's our mission, to help you navigate this process in a much easier way. And there we are. Okay, everybody should have received an email earlier today. We can tell a lot of you have already done this. If you were already in our software, we're encouraging you to upgrade to premium for literally $4.99. So it's less than my matcha latte at Starbucks. But we can tell a bunch of you established your free MyCap account. You can put in your 3 colleges. I'll be in there later, kind of show you as we're teaching you. Then it's like, here, see it all in practice. See all of the financial pieces in here, how you can really keep affordability as a key part of working through this whole process. And that helps with the lack of stress, especially on the parent side. So I am going to turn it over. JP is going to get in the weeds on all the admissions, and then I will kick in on financial aid, and then we will wrap it up. So here we go.
All right, thanks. So, I'm going to assume everyone knows this, but maybe I shouldn't. But the class of 2026, rising seniors, they've been submitting applications to colleges for 2 weeks now. In fact, I was just telling Peg that 10 minutes ago, one of my students messaged me just saying, "Hey, got my applications in, I'm good." So I have 2 kids who are already done with their college applications. But Common App opened up on August 1, and as I said, students have been submitting, applications, and I don't know, obviously, where you guys are at in the process, or as a family, where your childs are at, if you're the parents. But I'm just curious. If I ask you, like, are you ready for this? Like, if not, I'm just going to share the following information that I think is very critical to know. Last year, there was a 6% rise in the number of students applying via the Common App, just the Common App itself. And that extra increase was enough to change which schools would be considered a safety or a target or a reach. What ended up happening is most students overestimated their chances of getting admitted, and they fell short when it came to that increased competition. To give you some ideas or some numbers, the applications to NYU have increased more than 50% over the past 5 years. That they are in the 5th place as like the most popular, most applied to college. The top 4 colleges are going to be UC Irvine, UC Berkeley, UC San Diego, and top of the list is UCLA, which received over 146,000 applications. All right. So pretty stinking popular, very competitive. Other thing you need to know, selective majors. Selective majors like business, computer science, they have lower admit rates than the standard general college admissions publishes, what they publish for their admit rate. Families oftentimes will incorrectly assume that getting into that, that top major at a public university is easier than getting into an Ivy League. Statistically speaking, that's not necessarily true. In reality, some of the most selective academic programs in the country are now inside public flagship schools. And again, like I said, their admit rates rival an Ivy. To give
Yeah,
you an
I'll throw
example,
in like where I used to live in Seattle, University of Washington, the computer science program, really, really hard to get into.
exactly. Speaking of computer science, UCLA computer science admitted less than 3% of its applicants. UT Austin's Macomb School of Business admits fewer than 10% of its applicants. And of course, if you're out of state, it's far even lower than that. The point is, admissions officers are looking at every application through this lens that we call fit to major. Also, many top schools have filled half their freshman class through the binding early decision plan. Now, I've mentioned this in past webinars, but it's almost impossible to get admitted to a school like Tulane if you apply regular. They pretty much exclusively admit students through an early application deadline. So I basically tell all my kids, if it's possible to apply early, let's aim to do that. Another example, Vanderbilt admitted 61% of its incoming class through early decision. Northeastern, which I'm friends with the president there, but Northeastern intends to fill more than half of their class this upcoming year, more than half through the ED process. And I'm just going to ask real quick, just kind of see if you're all still listening. Leave a comment. Put it in the chat, not a Q&A. Put it in the chat. Are you guys planning to apply early? Has there been a discussion? Yes or no? Like ED, EA, or just nothing? Okay. Yep. I see. Okay. Good.
Yep, a lot of yeses.
Okay. Good. Great. So I'm glad to hear you like it's on your radar. This is good. Let's talk about test scores. It's probably more accurate to say test scores never lost their power, never lost their authoritative position in when it comes to admissions. And finally, schools are starting to admit it. Submitting a strong SAT or an ACT test score has always given students a measurable advantage, even in the 4 years, 5 years of test optional, right? Not only have I seen it increase the odds of being admitted, I've seen it improve the odds of getting more merit-based and need-based financial aid. Let that one sink in, getting more need-based financial aid because of higher test scores. And last, I'll say, is personal narrative remains one of the most powerful ways to really help your student stand out, especially when grades and test scores look, pretty similar across the applicants. We like to call it nowadays, your child's personal brand, but their personal brand needs to be clearly communicated in whether it's the Common App or a UC app or whatever the application system you're using. It needs to be clearly communicated through the essays and the activities list, to be honest. And I will say, though, with the rise of AI, some colleges, rightfully, I would say, are questioning the authenticity of written responses. I am catching majority of my kids who have written their essays with AI, and I'm like, this sounds like AI. And they're like, you caught me. And I'm like, all right, if I'm catching you, so is admissions. So anyway, so as a result, though, there's growing speculation or talk amongst admissions officers that they might in the future require things like video submissions or maybe do a recorded interview. I would expect, not necessarily this year, but I would expect that to continue to grow in the future years. It just maybe become part of the standard process. But so bottom line is, students who can articulate their personal story, articulate their genuine, authentic self, regardless of the medium, they have a major advantage when it comes to admissions. Now, all that's to say is if you're a senior, or parents, if your child is a senior and you haven't yet started your college applications, I'll be honest, you're behind. Okay. Take action now. Now, if you don't know where to start, this here is what you're looking at, I guess, is like my visual representation of my strategy, my game plan that I go through with my kids. And, truthfully, I find that most families go through this, process backwards. Oftentimes when I meet a family, like say, who starts with me now, a rising senior, and they have a college list and they present it to me. Oftentimes when I meet with them and I look at that school list, I find it's usually filled with what I'm going to call the I wants, and the college list ignored the must haves. All right. What do I mean by that? So let's think about this narrowing down the schools or finding that school list, through like this funnel, if you will, like I do in stages. And the first stage I always say you start with is finding the schools that are an academic fit. And I'm just going to simply say, does it offer the right program you want to study? Are you going to be with your academic peers? There's other factors, tons of other factors going, but those are a couple of the basic ones. Like, is it an academic fit? So if you want to, let's say you're going to major in business because, and that's maybe the path you want to go, then you're not picking a school like UCLA. I have to have this conversation every year because families are like, I want my kid to go to UCLA. And I'm like, okay, what are you going to major in? Business. I'm like, well, then they're not going to UCLA because they don't offer it. And then there's this whole, conundrum of what do we do? And I'm like, you only apply to the schools that offer the program you want to study. So make sure it's an academic fit. This is a must have, otherwise don't go to college. The next thing is going to be financial fit. Like, that's a big thing we're all about is we got to be able to afford school. Right. And if anyone's been paying attention to the news about the big beautiful bill, I know I butchered that, but the one big beautiful bill, the way you're going to pay for college is going to be radically changed starting next year, and you're going to be very limited, or your options are not going to be as robust, if you will, as they have been. So you really need to know your college budget. What can you afford? End of story, right? If you do not want your child to start out of school, go 2 years and then realize, oh, we can't afford it anymore, and you pull them out. Terrible. Cannot afford that. And then even if you can afford the school, I always like to say we should look at what school is going to be the best ROI. So anyway, financial fit, right? That's a must have. Then you got personal fit. At this stage, if I filtered, the schools down by these two must haves, an academic fit and a financial fit, and you hand it to your child to say, go shop these schools that I'm handing you, and pick the ones based upon your personal fit criteria. It could be the location. I want to be close to mom and dad. I want to be far away from mom and dad. I want to be at a big school or a small school. I want to be at a big football school, or I want to be at a nerdy research school, whatever it is, right? Mom, dad, you don't need to care. I don't care. This is your child going there for 4 years. Let them pick on their personal wants, right? But you got to qualify that list first and make sure it was an academic fit and make sure it was a financial fit. If you do that, you don't really have to worry about what they're picking. Okay. It makes this process so much easier and less stressful. But all that's to say is they start narrowing down the list of the schools you handed them based upon that personal fit criteria. And I always tell my kids, narrow it down to like your top 10. And again, top 10 is because I grew up with David Letterman, but try to pick it down, narrow it down to the top 10. And then you focus on what admission strategy you need to have for those schools. Okay. And as far as admission strategy goes, Peg, you want to just kind of, let's look at the next slide. I will say, the school's selectivity, some schools admit almost everyone, right? Some schools admit almost no one. And there's kind of everything in between. And I'll just simply say that your admission strategy always requires a defensive strategy. I'm going to use a sports analogy here. You always need a good defense. Defense wins championships, as they like to say. But the more selective a school is, as that admissions rate drops, you need to be implementing a very smart, strategic, offensive strategy as well. And you might be going, what are you talking about? The next slide here is just a super quick highlight of what I'm referring to. I'm going to say the defensive strategy, think of this as your academics, right? Your GPA. But GPA doesn't operate in a bubble. They're going to look at it in context of the rigor that your student challenged themselves. Did the school take the hardest classes that are offered, or did they take the easy classes, right? GPA is a relative term in that context. They're going to look at AP scores. Especially if you're going to schools like a UC, the UC schools, or in Cal State schools, where they won't look at an SAT or an ACT score. They say they're test blind. That's not true. They're not test blind. They look at AP tests. That's what they rely on. You need 4s and 5s. Better to have 5s, right? And you want to have a plethora of them. Timing wise, this means you can't be waiting till senior year to take all of these things, because you're then submitting an application without the scores. You have no scores. You can't prove that you can handle the academic rigor of that college. You need to be doing this stuff sophomore and junior year. So you got to be on this early. But then, test scores like, again, SAT, ACT, all that stuff is part of your defense, right? You always need an adequate, strong defense. But like I said, as the selectivity gets harder and the admissions rate drops, you need to start working on the offensive strategy, personal brand, the fit to major extracurricular activities. You want to be able to tell your story, vividly with great essays. You want to establish, strong relationships with the teachers and the counselors, so they can write comprehensive letters or recommendations that complement what your storyline is, not just the bland generic, like, oh, I was a good student, showed up to class, blah, blah, blah. Nobody cares about that. They got to write meaningful letters of recommendation. And then last thing, we'll just put it under the demonstrate interest. Most kids get this wrong. Most kids just do the basics, like go to the admissions page, sign up, tell me more, usually don't even look at the emails. Colleges are tracking that. Like, did you look at the email? Are you following them on social media? Are you liking them? Are you engaging on their post? Are you commenting? All that stuff. They're tracking that kind of information. That's the basics, right? Students need to be networking, or I know they don't like to use that word nowadays, but build relationships, if you will, with the admissions officers. You want it so that when that admissions officer sees your child's application, downloads it, that's not the first time they see their name. You want that admissions person to already kind of know who that student is, and like, oh, I visited that high school. I talked with that person. We blah, 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 blah. We've had a few emails since then. Something, right? Make an impression, good one. Build relationships with admissions officers. They're your biggest advocate, or they're going to be the gatekeeper that prevents you from going through the admissions process or getting a scholarship even. So anyway, that's all part of the.
Yeah, and I'll chime in for personally with my kids. There was at a Pennsylvania private school, same thing. She was in town for these optional interviews. My kids went. She walked out of the interview and said to me, "Both of your kids should apply here." Like she was impressed with them. Like you said, you got to show up, organized, dress appropriately. It's just then there's a face to a name, and sometimes those people are they're the first reads potentially of your application. So it's huge, and it's your kids have to learn this anyways, So it's just
100%, and I can tell
up.
you, fewer and fewer of my students that come to me for the mentoring and such, fewer and fewer of them are prepared for this. And I feel like I'm doing more and more mentoring just on those basic social human, skills.
Yeah.
So yeah. Now, one of the things you saw on that previous screen was, the essay, right? That's, I'm going to call being able to part of your offensive talent, a good story. I just want to dive into it a little bit more and just say, this is your child's chance to answer that $64,000 question. Why me? By the time the admissions officer, makes their way through the application, they're going to, by the time they get to the personal essay, they're going to, read the basic background demographic information, the school classes, maybe your grades, test scores. And then, they're going to see what you were involved in activity wise outside of classes. Okay. But at that point, the admissions officer doesn't really know why. Like, why are you doing this? Why are you the way you are? That personal essay is your child's opportunity to share their authentic story. Okay. And go ahead into the next one. And just to, prove that I'm not overinflating this or exaggerating the importance of it, read the quote here from Yale's former dean of admissions about what they say regarding the essay. It's basically saying it is where the student completely gets to control the voice, and really is what makes this whole document, they're talking about the application, makes it valuable to them. Okay. And then the next one, which prompt? Sometimes I get students that are like, what prompt is the better one to answer? Like, there is no better one to answer. Whichever one, and then as you see here, the admissions officer at Colorado College says, it doesn't matter which one you choose. Just pick the one that your child feels they can write about most confidently, or the one that they can at least connect to the most. Okay. And then the final thing I'll say about essays is, when I review the personal essay, the common advice I seem to be giving over and over and over, is to the student is, to tell your story, not someone else's. It's common for students to write about like how someone else had influenced them, or they spend, and then they'll spend like 80% of their essay talking about that other person. And I'm like, wow, I wish that other person was applying to the college, because that's the kid I want to admit, right? So only spend about 20% on that other person, or 20% on that life event, right? Spend the other 80%, at least 80%, talking about what, your child talks about what they learned from that, how they've grown from that, how are they implementing what they've learned, right? This is where they show maturity. Okay. And, and this is that's when they're telling the colleges, like, this is who I am. This is how I'm going to show up to your college campus. This is how I'm going to contribute to the campus community. Right. And the only other tip I'll basically say is, to the students, I always say, don't write in generalities. Like, they sometimes like to write about these fanciful, vague notions. No, give concrete, specific examples, of like how you're going to contribute or what you want to do. You want to create that vivid impression in the mind of the reader. Okay. Next, let's just talk about deadlines, if you will. Soon enough, if you haven't already, you're gonna realize there is an insane amount of deadlines to keep track of. I highly, highly recommend using a spreadsheet of some sort where you can list out, all the schools that you're applying to. And then I would add columns for, obviously, the school name, but add columns for like the various admissions deadlines. Like, is it ED, EA, regular, rolling, so on and so forth. Columns for, keep in mind that some schools might have different deadlines for scholarship applications, right? That might not necessarily be tied to an admissions deadline. Some schools are going to have different deadlines for their honors program, right? And then if you are going to apply for financial aid, just know that financial aid has different deadlines from admissions. But with that said, those financial aid deadlines can sometimes be dependent upon the admissions deadline. Meaning, if you apply regular decision at a certain school, they might say, okay, we need financial aid forms at such and such date. But if you say, oh no, I'm applying EA or ED, then they might say, oh, we want the financial aid form sooner. So it's kind of a moving target. So it's just a lot to always know, right? In the end, I'm just going to say, know your deadlines, plan your calendar accordingly, and however much time you think you need to complete everything, double it. And it's better to build buffer, so that you're on top of it and have, some time to spare versus, missing a deadline. And then, because I've mentioned scholarships, I'm just going to briefly talk about this. The two basic sources, for scholarships are going to be either from the schools themselves, we're going to call that institutional scholarships, or private scholarships. Okay. Not from the school. So, keep in mind, institutional scholarships, they're awarded by the school itself, the university or the college, right? It's pretty much going to come from the admissions office. So all the stuff you're trying to do to impress admissions, to say, admit me, because I'm awesome. Well, that's the same stuff that's going to then make an impact on them to say, man, we should give that person a scholarship, right? The thing about most scholarships from the institutions is, also keep in mind, they're usually for 4 years. I like that, right? And and Peg will show this later, but our MyCap software, the software that drives a lot of what we do, it can show you what those scholarships, what are available from the schools. And if you put in your academic information, all that stuff, it can even project like what are potentially likely scholarships from those schools. It's amazing. As far as private scholarships, that again, that obviously that's not from the schools. Oftentimes it's like a one-time payment, like ads for first year. So there are some exceptions, of course, but again, if you're a MyCap premium member, College A Pro provides you a robust database, if you will, of private scholarships. And the thing I prefer about this is that your information is kept private. There's all these other websites out there that is, in the past, especially 25 years ago, I was like, oh, go to FastWeb, go to scholarships.com, because that was the only option. Well, the downside to those websites or those kinds of websites is they sell your personal information. That's their business model. MyCap doesn't. College A Pro doesn't. Your information is private. So if you're a premium member, you do have access to that robust database of private scholarships. So that's all I wanted to say. With that, I'll pass it off to Peg.
All right. So let's, and I'm going to touch on that a little bit more. I'll be in the software. I'll show you guys exactly where you access those private scholarships. So let's talk about that financial fit that JP was talking about. That the biggest takeaway here is we all know these colleges are just getting insanely expensive. They're over, there's a few that are over 100,000 sticker price. Technically, it's called cost of attendance. That's everything. That's tuition fees, room and board, books, travel, personal expenses. And I always get this question. If you're in the software, that number you see is the whole enchilada. That's all of it. So we've got your full cost of attendance. But the key thing to keep in mind, and this is where it gets kind of counterintuitive and weird, all these colleges are discounting. They're all on sale, if you will. They don't all do it the same way. And they don't, like, even with my kids, two, same age, same high school they're graduating from, but different kids, right? They got into some of the same schools and they got different discounts, or maybe one didn't get any and another one did. So you got to be really careful with this kind of stuff of taking advice from friends and family. I always tell people friends and family are lovely, but in this arena, you don't want to take their advice unless you're going to sit down and put the tax returns on the table and get in the weeds about everything about your kids. I'm kidding, obviously. And because you're not comparing apples to apples. So just keep that in mind. So how are these colleges discounting? They're doing it there's three different options here. If you have need, and I'm going to talk about that in a minute, they'll offer need-based grants. Your state can, the federal government has some, but most of it is, and JP used this term, institutional merit aid, institutional grant. So that's coming from the college, and they have different ways. They different ways of meeting need and calculating your need. That's a lot of the stuff that we take care of in our software if you're in there. Merit-based scholarships, that's what JP was just talking about. Not based on your financials, based on your child, grades, test scores, talent, music, sports, whatever it is. And then a lot of families leverage this third box. It's this self-help. We call it self-help, but loans and work study. Work study, your child's working, gets a paycheck. Loans are loans. We know what those are. You want to maximize the first two buckets because that's coming from other people's budgets and not yours. So you want to try and maximize that and find that great academic personal fit, but also the financial. I love how JP tees it up, like figure out the academic and financial, and then tell your child, here, go look at all of these schools you can pick, right? That's a great way to do it. Normally people do academic, personal, and then they decide to look at the financial. So let's look at an actual example so I'm not just blowing smoke here. So this was University of Washington, Gonzaga, and Spokane. So look at those sticker prices. This was a couple years ago, but this is what's happening. Almost double, right? Oh, more than double, right? So it's easy to say, well, 77,000, we can't do that. It's off the list. But look what happens with this family. They have an SAI, and I'm going to talk about that in a minute, of 30,000. This is an actual kid. Look what happened at the end. UW was the same price. Loans were given, but I'm not including loans in this number because that's not the free stuff. But look at Gonzaga. It went to 40,000. So that's a very different conversation for a family to have around affordability. There might be a reason to spend a little bit more on Gonzaga, but it's not 77,000, it's 40. So this is what you've got to get your hands around for these different schools for your kids. So let's talk about the need-based aid. How do you know if you're eligible for need at these different colleges? Well, the way that they do it is pretty simple equation. They take that sticker price that we talked about and they subtract something called the student aid index. It's also still being called the old terminology you'll see some places, expected family contribution. So if you see SAI or EFC, they're both in this middle bucket. They take the difference, that's your need. So school costs 100, like I was saying, you have an SAI of 50, you have 50,000 of need. That doesn't mean that the college swoops in and says, here's your 50,000 in need-based grants. Many schools don't meet 100% of need, and this SAI, as I'm going to show you when we get in the software and talk a little bit, it can be different between two schools that require the same financial aid form. So it gets pretty convoluted and it can be very opaque as well, that it's hard to know what these colleges are doing to decide if you have need and how much need. So let's get a little deeper. I'm just going to cover the highlights here. It's assets and income that make up this student aid index. The assets are your non-retirement assets. That's one of the biggest mistakes. So jot this down. Do not put retirement assets on the financial aid forms, on the FAFSA. When they ask what your assets are on the CSS profile, lest they specifically say retirement assets, which they do, you only put your non-retirement money, because if you put your retirement, they're going to look at it and say, oh, they're going to think you have a lot more money to spend for college. So only non-retirement. If you have been fortunate enough to save in 529s, that's the college savings accounts. It depends on who the owner is, whose asset that is. Typically, the parents, if the parents can save, you open an account. That's your asset. It's not your child's, because remember, these forms are going to ask about the student and the parent's assets. That's key because student assets are assessed at a much higher rate, 20 or 25% versus a little bit shy of 6% for the parent. So really big difference there. So keep that in mind. If anybody else has a 529, very common for grandparents to have 529s. They're not in the household. That isn't even disclosed when it asks, even though it's, the child's the beneficiary, the student, that's not disclosed as an asset of that family, either the student or the parents. And on the FAFSA, which I'm going to talk about in a minute, if you have 529s, like I had two 529s, one for each one of my kids. When I was doing Brennan's forms, I only put the balance on the FAFSA of his account, not both. So keep that in mind. That's a new change with when the FAFSA went through the FAFSA Simplification Act. If you happen to have custodial accounts, if that UGMA and UTMA, you see that if you're like, I don't know what that is, don't worry, you don't have them. That is an asset of the child. You are going to want to talk to us about strategies that you potentially would implement to change that. It might not be needed. It might be something that causes too much tax ramifications and hurts you. That's a longer, very focused conversation with just your family and looking at the account. Joint accounts, if the parent's on it, that can be a parent asset. Lastly, real estate. The primary home, the home you live in, the equity in that home, most schools won't look at that. Equity meaning market value minus your mortgage or HELOC, whatever liens you have. Any other real estate is fair game. It doesn't matter if it's in this country, none of that matters. That real estate is fair game, the equity. So the key thing is representing the value of those properties accurately, not lying, but not overestimating. And that's something we help families with every year. Assets are the day you hit submit. So you have time to plan. if you're hearing me and you're like, oh, we have this big account, but we're going to do this or that, we're going to need to buy a car. There's some things, to think about. If you have credit card debt, you can pay it down. All these different strategies to maybe not have as many assets to put on the form. Now, income is not real time. It's a 2-year look back. We call it prior year. This has been in place since President Obama, so a long time. All of you 26 parents, when these forms go live, you're going to be reporting on last year, 2024. You can't go back and change it. If your situation is worse now, sorry that's happening to you, but let's play that card. You're going to be appealing to the colleges. That's a step in this process. You're definitely going to be appealing if your situation has changed and not for the better. So keep that in mind, because that always causes stress for people. And then the student income, that's a big driver, but most kids, it's actually 11,000. It went up to 11. That means it's a wash. So if they don't make over 11,000, it's a wash. Parental income is the biggest driver by far, because they assess it much higher than assets. So that's high level. I know that was quick, how that SAI is calculated. But a lot of you have set up your MyCap account. So you might be looking at it over on another screen, right? And I'm going to show you in a minute, but there's SAIs front and center there. And if those numbers are pretty high, and JP and I have worked with hundreds of families through the years where this is the case, like they might be $150,000, right? Remember that equation I shared? You don't have any need in that scenario at any school. Thank God the schools don't cost 150,000. But that doesn't mean that there's no discounts. The discounts are going to be those merit scholarships that JP's already touched on. Couple things there, and I'm going to show you how you can see all these merit scholarships for all these schools in a minute. Getting merit is strategic, and when we work with families, and the families that JP is working on in our comprehensive Wake Me package, as you're building the list, you're thinking about merit scholarships. You're thinking, what are competing schools? Matt Carpenter, who is on our team, he's always saying, he's in the Boston area, hey, if I have a student that comes to me and they love BU, they love the city campus, they want to be there, they don't like Northeastern, totally different campus, they'll still apply to Northeastern, because those schools compete. And down the road, if that student gets merit from both schools, you can use those competing offers in that appeal process. So that's hugely forward thinking, that a family would never think to do that. It's like, I don't like that school, why would I ever apply to it? So there's a lot of thinking there. Also with these financial aid forms, there are schools, NYU being one of them. JP's already mentioned NYU, who hugely popular. You don't submit those financial aid forms, they won't consider you for merit aid. So there's a lot of moving pieces here. Lastly, there are some schools, quite a few in this country, that tend to be really popular ones, the highly selective colleges, that give zero merit aid. There's no kids walking around the Brown campus that have a merit scholarship. They just don't give them. So if you have a high achieving child who's got a 36 ACT and a 5.0 GPA, that's awesome, but your child's not gonna get rewarded through a scholarship at Brown or Princeton or MIT. They're just not. Bowdoin, any of those kind of schools. So just keep that in mind. You're going to want to strategize if you're not eligible for need-based aid. So those are the two forms of discounts. Just really quickly, if you don't qualify for grants or scholarships, although there are schools in this country that give every student money, you can look at schools that are on the lower end of tuition. Doesn't mean they're bad schools. My daughter went to James Madison University, and when she went, it was about 32,000 for me. She was a Washington kid, Seattle, state of Washington. I know 35,000 a lot of money, but it was a bargain for an out-of-state school. So keep that in mind. And honors programs can be huge if your child gets in. There's a lot of perks, but there can also be financial incentives. So these are all these different ways to cut the cost of college. So let me touch on the two financial aid forms, and then I'm going to jump in the software real quick. So the FAFSA, if you haven't heard of this, it's going to be a part of your vocabulary. It's the free application for federal student aid. It's gone through some changes in the last couple years. If this is your first child, consider yourself lucky. I think they're finally, I'm going to knock on wood, I think they finally got it down. It's been a one crazy year and then one kind of crazy year. So the form goes live October 1. I will tell you that like last year, they are in beta testing. So they're in beta 1 right now. If your child ends up at school and they tell you, hey, you have access to the FAFSA, it's because that school was accepted into beta 1. It's not wrong. And you can get started. I would recommend you get started. It doesn't mean that the college is going to jump on it when you submit it, because we have pros. I've asked them, they're not going to deal, but it's off your list. You get it in. All those deadlines JP was talking about, you don't have to worry about that. There's also going to be beta 2 that starts in September. That's going to be a bigger group of families that are going to be able to get into beta 2. But it officially goes live to the masses October 1. If I didn't see any class of 2027 parents, but if there are any, no, you can't start it early if you're a go-getter. You gotta wait until next October to do it. As I already shared, it's going to be all about 2024 when you get in that form, and we'll do in-depth webinars about this. You are going to be required to move your financial information from the IRS into that form. You are not going to have a choice unless you fall into an exception. Then they're going to ask you to manually enter it. You're going to have to consent to do that. And we recommend almost every family submits the FAFSA. One key thing to keep in mind about the FAFSA that's going to be very different than the form I'm about to talk about: only one biological parent submits this form. We call it, and in the industry, it's called the custodial parent. The definition of the custodial parent changed a couple years ago. It is the parent who provides the most financial support on a year look back from when you're submitting that form. So say you're submitting it October 10th. It's literally a year look back. So it's August 14th right now. If you are 50-50 and you're divorced or separated, and it's pretty close, how you provide support for the student that's going to college, your child, like, strategize on this, right? Spend $1 more for the parent that is going to put the best foot forward to get the money from the college. And you should understand how the colleges are doing this. That Congress left this a gray area. The backup for this is if it's 50-50 to the penny, it's the parent who makes the most money. It never should fall to the backup. Use this if you can to play this card if you're divorced, and try and figure this out. And this is something we help people with too, because they don't realize how they can, being honest, how they can figure out, and you have time, so you can spend a little more. It could mean for some families tens of thousands of dollars of more money. So it's worth it. It's worth it to strategize and at least look at it. Lastly, with the FAFSA, you're going to need anybody who is the student and anybody who's what we call contributing. A contributor to the FAFSA, sharing their information, is going to need what's called an FSA ID, a Federal Student Aid ID. You can go ahead and get those now. You can Google it. I've got the link here. Just make sure you're on a studentaid.gov site in case there's nefarious people out there that are trying to grab your social security number and your date of birth, because that's what you're going to be putting in. That stuff you want to be very protective of. Make sure you're there. You're going to submit it. It goes off to the Social Security Administration. It gets approved. They're going to have real-time approval of this. That goes into effect. Actually, it might have gone into effect August 4th. Don't quote me on that. But just go ahead and get it done. Get it done and put that information in a safe place. You're going to need it every year when you submit the FAFSA. And if you are divorced, remember, whoever that custodial parent is, only that parent's going to get the FSA ID. And typically, if you're married and you file married filing jointly, that's your tax filing status, only one parent. But if you're filing differently, there could be some nuances there. That's something we can help you with one-on-one, but you need to get that to log in and start the FAFSA. The second form is called the CSS profile. This is not a form that you do in lieu of the FAFSA. It's in addition to the FAFSA. So there's about 250 colleges. Mostly private, but like UNC Chapel Hill, William and Mary, Michigan, um, UVA, and a few other schools threw their hat in the ring. Vermont, I don't know if they're still requiring it, but when there was the whole FAFSA fiasco, they didn't want to wait to get the FAFSAs, so they said, "Hey, we're going to take the CSS profile." So you can't submit it by accident. If you go into the CSS and you search a school, it won't come up. But you don't even have to worry about that, because if you're in the software, I'm going to show you, we are going to tell you if the CSS profile is required. So you won't make the mistake of missing that, because then you won't get any of the institutional money. Key differences here, and I touched on this at the beginning when I talked about real estate. These colleges and this form is going to ask about the home you live in, the primary home. They're going to ask when you bought it, what you bought it for, what's the market value, and you want to make sure you're not overestimating that, and what are your liens? What's your mortgage? Do you have a HELOC? They're going to do the math on your equity, and some of these schools literally treat it as a liquid asset. I'm going to show you in the software how we basically behind the scenes will help you see how these different colleges look at that, because that's a big distinguisher between them. If you are divorced or separated, there's no such thing as only the custodial parent submits. The custodial parent submits with your child. The non-custodial parent submits, it's called a non-custodial profile. They both go separately to College Board. College Board, the SAT, AP company, nonprofit, they administer this. It's private. That information gets there. Most schools will look at both parents. There's a few, like Santa Clara, that requires the CSS, but they don't look at the non-custodial profile. I mean, the non-custodial parent. That's a huge planning opportunity. It could mean a lot more money from Santa Clara. Um, Business owners, this is a change that is going into effect for you guys, back to the norm. The FAFSA, if you're a small business owner with less than 100 full-time employees, the value of your business, you don't disclose. But on the CSS, they want to know everything. So if you're a business owner, if you have 3 businesses, they're going to ask you all about your businesses. You don't want to overvalue your business, is a key takeaway, like real estate. And then just real quick, if you are divorced and the non-custodial parent, it's not safe for the student to interact with that parent, or the parent's not reachable, has been off the grid for a long time, they're just planting the seed. There is a non-custodial waiver you will submit to the colleges. It's well worth your time if that's the case, because you want to explain to them why they should not include that parent, and just do it with the custodial parent and the student's information. If it's a valid reason, most of them will approve the waiver. It's not a valid reason to say my ex just doesn't want to pay. That's not a valid reason. So, okay, so now what I'm going to do is hop in. I'm going to share my screen here. And I'm going to hop in and show you an actual family, because it's kind of solidifies everything we've been talking about. And it, you might have been in the software and even like are wondering about navigating a few things. So I'll show you all this. So first off, JP was talking about private scholarships. There you go. You click here, you can search, you can pick your criteria. There's filters in there. So just pointing that out, since he chatted about that. The journey you're on is along the top here. We know your journey. We're going to take you on each step. We're going to make you mark them as completed, because that's the way you get through this with less stress. You see front and center, there's your federal SAI, the schools that only require the FAFSA, that's what you're going to use. Here's your institutional SAI. These are the schools that require the CSS. Remember, there's that range there, because as I said, not all schools look at home equity the same way. For example, Stanford requires the CSS profile, but just philosophically, like, we don't expect parents to tap that. So we're ignoring that on the CSS. We know that. We've built that into a projection if you put Stanford in here. We know that that SAI is going to be lower. And that goes all the way up to schools that really look at all of it, which, by the way, you should appeal, because you can't access all your equity. That's crazy. And usually when you call them on it, you're going to have a successful appeal. So that's that you see here, compare awards, appeals. That's later in the journey, later senior year. We ask you your budget. JP did a great job stressing this. Like, trust me, If I said the word budget and you're cringing, and I used to be a financial planner and a financial advisor, I had people who made a lot of money who cringed. It's don't feel badly that you're cringing, but please, 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 you've got to talk about your budget. And we're gonna force it. We're gonna ask you a bunch of questions, and then we want you to update it up here in your profile, and that comes into play. So now let's just you have your school list over here, and if you're in the premium version, you can put in hundreds of schools, whatever you want. Then once you get to the school, we're gonna immediately tell you. Remember the UW Gonzaga example? Hey, this student is getting a really nice discount. What's the discount they're getting? It's based on their need, and we're showing you 4 years. It's a 4-year degree, and hopefully not more. This is your total cost. We're not going to show you just a 1-year view. We want you to be fully prepared. Over here it says SAI basis. That's how you know that BU requires the CSS profile. You don't have to go research it and look on their website and Google it and try and find it and spend 10 minutes. We've got it all right here for you. We tell you how they handle merit and how they handle need-based aid. We can pick a school like Chapman out in California. This student, we're projecting a $40,000 merit scholarship. And here you go. Here are all the merit awards that Chapman has, and the one that we're projecting, which we will if it's likely or automatic. If it's not, you still have this whole list to use. This is your planning tool, this software, and you can click it and add it, but we will do it and we'll show you which one we picked and why, based on the grades and test scores and the different parameters that that college uses. So you can do this deep dive on all these colleges. But lastly, let me show you before we wrap up here, you can also search. You can truly build a list, put in your academic and personal filters. So if we go to school selection here and we say, all right, let's look at, my child's going to look at a traditional 4-year school, and they don't want a really big school. They want, went to a smaller high school, a smaller school, and don't want to be like too far from home, but not right on top. So we'll say, within 500 miles. And then my child wants to major in, say, business. A lot of other filters that you can see here, but I just want to show you how this works. Then you search. Then the really powerful part is we have all these ways you can sort this list. The most popular are sorting by merit scholarships or by need. And this is specifically for your family and specifically for your child. We look here. So these are the schools where you're going to get the best need-based aid, and you can see the net costs for the first year projected right here. So this is a great way to search. If Babson fits all the academic and personal fit filters, great. Now we're telling you for your family how affordable it is. Say your SAIs are super high. Go to merit scholarship. This is going to pull where your child and dial in your profile so it's really accurate with the grades and test scores where they're going to get the most. And there's some schools here that's huge merit scholarships, right? You like some of these, add the school to your list. It shows up here. Do the deep dive right here. So you truly can build a list with affordability in mind. So can't stress enough, get in here, and most of you are in here already. You've got the free version. If you are eligible for free and reduced lunch, and it's hard to pay that $4.99, we're not leaving anybody behind. All you do is email us at support@collegeaidpro.com, and we're not going to vet you. You're on the honor system. We will happily give you access to the software because you need it. You need it. This is gonna help you beyond measure. The other thing we're gonna offer for everybody tonight is we strongly encourage you to set up a 15-minute call. And JP, if you can just pop that in this landing page I'm about to show. A 15-minute call. We have a team of experts that have opened up their calendars to do this. Book a call with one of our experts to chat about. Think about this. This is an opportunity for us to discuss with you how your family can save more money. We've gone through how you should look at it from the admission standpoint. Now I've gone through all these discounts that these colleges are offering. That's where we can discuss this with you. We can look at your MyCap and say, these are your SAIs. We might catch a mistake that you made in the profile so that maybe you pop something in the wrong place, and we're going to help you fix that. And then we can talk to you how we can support you further, right? So we're going to point out where your family falls, if you will, what your opportunities are to save more. If you even already know I can get some discounts, or maybe you're just starting and you don't even know, we'll point that out for you, and we'll talk to you about how we can partner with you. So this is kind of a no-brainer. Everybody's got 15 minutes, right? Sign up. All you do is hit schedule here. You're going to want to do this tonight by they say midnight tonight, so the first thing tomorrow morning, in essence, right? And the calendar's open. There's a bunch of dates through September 5th. Please do this. It's really a no-brainer, right? I promise you'll get an insight from this, and it's free, right? The software, get in the free software. From a parent who's been through this, JP still has a little one, right? He's been through it a million times. He refers to them as his kids because they're his kids, right? That he works with. But he hasn't been through it as a parent. But I'm telling you, doing this and getting dialed in, it's going to help you. And we've got everything there for you to hopefully simplify it. We continue to educate you through webinars. So definitely take us up on this offer to chat with us for 15 minutes, because it'll bring clarity. Anything you want to add there, JP?
No, I'll echo everything you said, and I've been trying to. My fingers only type so fast. I've been trying to get through as many of the
Yeah,
Q and
we can
A's as.
never get to all the questions,
No,
guys, because
and
we
there's
just
so many
have too
good
many
questions. I
people.
will say some of you have some really great questions, but honestly, it's a little generic. Might need a little bit more info. So even for something like that, I blasted the comments here with the links here. So book a consult. As I put in my last comment there, frankly, I don't know anyone who likes to overpay.
Well, who wants to buy something I don't shop at Nordstrom's, but yeah, I know they have their annual or biannual
right. Oh
sales.
yeah.
If I was a Nordstrom
My,
shopper,
my
I'm more of a TJ Maxx girl.
my wife is an exclusive Nordstrom shopper,
Yeah,
and but
I'm sure
we
she
she
does the
waits for that
sale.
sale, and gets a year's worth. But that's the point. Is like, if even if you could let's quote unquote afford to pay 90,000 a year for college, do you want to? If you could have done it for 60,
Right.
and even or vice versa. Let's say you could get it down to 60, but what if your budget that you could afford was only 40? Don't you want to know that now?
Yeah. Yeah. I can't stress enough. My ideal world is every parent knows, that has their list of their kids' schools and knows, okay, this is what it's going to cost this year, all 4 years. What are my deltas each year? How am I going to do? And then you can really compare Wesleyan with Stanford, with Indiana University, whatever the schools are. And I've done this so many times with parents, and they're like, oh, this is what I needed. Sometimes grandparents want to know, well, what's your delta? What do you need? And grandparents can look at it and go, all right, I can help here. Just let us help you do this. Sign up, talk to one of our experts. We'll give you the lowdown on your family, where you kind of fall, what kind of family you are, where discounts could come. And then we can tell you how we can help you. We have different ways that we support families, and we really try and meet you where you are. So can't stress that enough. So go ahead and do that tonight, and then you can chat, before either the week of Labor Day or between now and Labor Day. So it's going to be well worth your time. So JP, thank you. Thank you for joining in your super, super busy time.
Absolutely. Happy to.
Yeah, thanks everybody for being here. Everybody have a great rest of your night. Take care.
Bye, everyone.